Hello, Year 10, and welcome to this week's first poem. This is One Flesh by Elizabeth Jennings, and for many students, it's one of those that's often overlooked and underrated. It's a really clever poem, I think quite simple, but at the same time really effective, so I hope you like it. And obviously, as usual, we're going to read the poem, have a little chat about what some of the things mean, and then some questions at the end. Okay? So the ideas in this poem, before we read it, I thought I'd just kind of give an introduction to the main ideas. It might make it a bit easier when we actually go through the poem. So the first thing is the relationship in this poem is between a mature married couple, which is perhaps different from quite a lot of the poems that we've read already and the ones that are yet to read. The speaker in this poem is their child, and the child, has grown up and is now looking at their parents' relationship and asking questions. The key image in the poem is the two separate beds which the husband and wife sleep in. They don't sleep in the same bed anymore. It's that image that has caused the confusion for the speaker, and it's made the speaker question their mum and dad's relationship. The poem explores the idea of a long-term relationship and the way couples feel about each other when they've been together for many years. So where the poems that we've already looked at might look at the kind of start of relationships or the ending of relationships, this poem is focusing on the kind of the way a relationship has developed over time and how it's the state it's in years after it started. In this poem, the couple are not getting divorced or splitting up. They are simply older, and their sleeping arrangements have confused their child. So it's a unique poem in that sense because none of the other poems in this collection will look at this same topic. But what is interesting is, again, if you compare this to Sonnet 43, where that's about how much the speaker loves the husband, this one kind of is a similar kind of relationship, but years later, rather than when the relationship is fresh and new and full of passion. We're looking at a relationship as it's kind of got colder in sometime in the future. The last point here on this slide is the title is a reference to the words used in a Christian wedding ceremony. The idea of being one flesh is what allegedly what the Christian wedding ceremony does. It kind of unites two people in one flesh. So kind of it's a unification, a sense of bringing two individuals together into one body, and that's what marriage is meant to represent. Two separate people who will be from that point on one combined kind of couple. I hope that makes sense. Let's read the poem now. One flesh. Lying apart now, each in a separate bed, he with a book, keeping the light on late, she like a girl dreaming of childhood, all men elsewhere. It is as if they wait some new event. The book he holds unread, her eyes fixed on the shadows overhead. Tossed up like flotsam from a former passion, how cool they lie. They hardly ever touch, or if they do, it is like a confession of having little feeling or too much. Chastity faces them, a destination for which their whole lives were a preparation. Strangely apart, yet strangely close together. Silence between them like a thread to hold and not wind in. And time itself's a feather touching them gently. Do they know they're old? These two, who are my father and my mother, whose fire from which I came has now grown cold. Okay, so before we go through my kind of talk through, just to remind you that you've got some annotations and some notes available as well in the Google Classroom, and make sure you read them carefully because they do contain an awful lot of useful information. So don't just use my video, make sure you read them as well. Okay, so let's have a kind of dig into this poem. There are four things that I want to look at today, and they're highlighted in the different colours at the side. blue, poetic language, green is rhyme, yellow is caesura, and red for question mark at the end. We'll look at the blue first. So poetic language, the first one is lying. The very first word, the word lying. Obviously, this has got two meanings. It's obviously the act of lying down, as in what the couple are doing in their separate beds, but it's also got the sense of not being truthful and not being honest. And perhaps what the poem's about is trying to get the couple to accept that their relationship has changed and that they need to do something about it. That word lying would indicate that they are pretending things are okay, when perhaps they might not be. In line 2, it says keeping the light on late. The phrase keeping the light on could mean literally he's reading and he's got his bedside light on. However, it's also a kind of euphemism, which is used to explain when you have feelings for someone. Keeping the light on means that you might have feelings for someone, and in this case, the husband has got a light on late, suggesting that he still feels possibly quite passionate towards his wife, and maybe that's part of the problem in their relationship. He feels passionate, and she feels passionless. The third line brings in the wife here, and it says, like a girl dreaming of childhood. You know, she's not a girl, she's like a girl, so there's a sense of her looking back into her past. And childhood is not where she is either. She's an adult, she's mature. So childhood is again years previously to this moment. Both those ideas of girl and childhood are wrapped up with the idea of innocence, of a time before she would have been in relationships, before she met a husband, and before her having children. So this line would suggest that she is dreaming of a time when she was a lot younger and had no experience of relationships. The last phrase in this first stanza, the shadows overhead, it again could literally mean the shadows being cast by the bedside light that's on in the room, but it's also slightly metaphorical and could suggest that in their relationship there are shadows ahead of them. There's a looming shadow over this relationship, a problem that needs to be dealt with in the future. Could it be divorce? Is it unhappiness? There's a sense that there's a darkness hanging over this couple. Into the second stanza, we have the lovely image of tossed up like flotsam from a former passion. Now, flotsam is what's left after a shipwreck. So it's the bits of broken wood that float on the top of the sea. And it's a really powerful image suggesting that a former passion, when they were intimate and kind of quite clearly and powerfully in love with each other, that's been wrecked, and all that remains is bits of passion floating on the water. The rest of the ship has sunk and is now at the bottom of the sea. The second interesting phrase in the second stanza is this phrase, like a confession. And a confession is when you go to church and you tell the priest all the things you've done wrong. So in this couple, this relationship, there's a sense of guilt, and they have to, in order to clear that guilt, they have to confess as a problem, and that's possibly quite difficult for this couple. So, what's the problem they've got? What's the guilt that they're feeling? Well, having little feeling, so not having enough passion is one problem, and the other problem, the other guilt, is having too much passion. So, what the second stanza is drawing our attention to is that the couple have got an imbalance in their relationship. One doesn't feel enough, and the other feels too much. That's causing a disruption and an imbalance in their relationship. Into the final stanza, we have a nice use of juxtaposition in the first line of the final stanza, strangely apart yet strangely close together. And it's the emphasis that the repetition creates there of strangely. Yes, it's strange, it's unusual, it's not, it's a bit weird. Strangely apart, as in it's weird that they are separate. strangely close, and it feels awkward when they're together. So it's a very interesting line that kind of sums up their relationship. They're together and they're not together. They are close, but yet they're also distant. It's a really good line that kind of sums up the whole poem. The next one is like a thread to hold and not wind in. And this image, using a simile, is the idea of that there's this very fine thread that holds them together, almost invisible. It's a little strand of cotton that keeps them together. But rather than winding it in, which will bring them closer together, they just hold it. They're just holding on to each end. He's got his end in his hand, and she's got her end in her hand, and they're not winding it in because that will bring them closer together. This moves on to the metaphor for time, a feather touching them gently. If you think about it, if a feather touches you gently, you hardly notice it. It could be touching you gently for many minutes, many hours before you notice it, and that's what time is like for this couple. It's very gently been affecting them, so much so that they've not noticed it. But now they are separate. They are not the same people. They're not the same relationship as they did have. But time has done this damage very, very gently over many, many years. Now, when we look at the rhyming in this poem, the rhyming is really quite interesting too, and it looks like it's quite consistent, but there's a subtle change partway through and towards the end. So first of all, we've got bed rhyming with unread, so we've got this kind of first line, and then there's a bit of a gap before the fifth line rhymes again. So it goes A, B. Childhood doesn't rhyme with anything. Then we get a B again. Then we get the A. And then we get the A again. So we've got a combination of broken couplets and couplets in that first stanza. In the second stanza, we have passion rhyming with confession, which also echoes with destination and preparation. So we've got an A, B, A, B, A pattern in the second stanza. So again, broken couplets and full couplets. And in the final stanza, we have a slight change. So we've got together and mother as a kind of half rhyme in lines 1 and 5. And then we've got and feather as well. So we've got A, B, A, B, A, B. So together and feather and mother all kind of rhyme, and then hold, old, and cold. And the last stanza, unlike the others, has got no full couplets. Every rhyme in the final stanza are broken couplets. So you could see that the writer here is trying to draw attention to this couple are kind of broken and they're not going to get back together in the way they were. Stanza 1 and stanza 2 have couplets, which might suggest that there's been some possibility, some passion in the relationship. But the final stanza has no couplets, which you could interpret to mean that the passion has gone and it's not going to return. Caesura is one of those possibly new techniques that's you're not familiar with, but it's really easy. It's just got a bit of a strange name. And it refers to when a line in a poem has a kind of break or a pause somewhere in it. And I've highlighted those in yellow, and it's quite easy in this poem because the punctuation really makes them stand out. So as you scan through, you can see it's most of the lines have got some form of punctuation in the middle, and the effect of that is to split those lines into two pieces, which obviously reflects the relationship that the poem's about. Each line is complete, but the caesura splits it into two, just like the separate beds that the couple sleep in. The caesura is the space between those two beds, the gaping kind of chasm in their relationship, the lack of passion in the room. And finally, the last thing to draw attention to is that question mark at the end. Finishing on a question, it really draws the attention right at the end of this poem to not be on the couple, the husband and wife, but it draws the attention onto the speaker, the child, who is looking at their parents and trying to work out what's going on. And it makes you think, with that question mark, that the speaker doesn't really understand their mum and dad, and this view that they've got of this kind of passionless relationship might actually not be true. Uh, they don't really know what's going on with the mum and dad. It's just they are kind of interpreting the things that they've seen, but they don't really know how they feel. So that question mark is there at the end just to kind of remind us that when we're looking at a couple that we're not part of, when we're an outsider looking at a couple, what we think we know, we don't really know. Only they know that what's really going on. So that question mark to remind us of that. So these are the questions I would like you to answer today. Question one: do you think the couple regret the lack of physical contact? Contact. Explain your answer. So, do you think they are sad? Do you think they're miserable? Do you think they regret the way the relationship is, or do you think that they have accepted it? They might even welcome the lack of physical contact. You might want to think about how one character or one member of the relationship might feel a particular way and how the other member might feel a different way. So there's a couple of ways to answer question one to think about. Question two, find two different examples of caesura in the poem. What effect do they have? So we've just been through caesura on the previous page. All you need to do is find two. So pick two lines, any ones that you like, and explain the effect of the caesura that is in those lines. Now, obviously, caesura is the line is a break in the middle of the line, so you need to explain the effect of each time it's being used in the examples you pick. Does it draw emphasis? Does it add meaning? Is it symbolic? You get the idea. Question three. Why do you think the speaker does not reveal their identity until the final couplet? Well, it's not a couplet at the end, I don't think. Just check. No, it's not a couplet. No, but the identity of the speaker is kind of being held back right until the end. And your job is to think, well, why do that? What's the effect of ending with that kind of revelation rather than starting with that revelation? And I think I talked about it in the previous slide. So if you're not sure, look back at what I said about the previous slide towards the end with that question mark bit, because you might get your answer there.